The evening hours stretch before you like an endless corridor, and sleep feels impossibly distant. Your mind races with the concerns of tomorrow, the unfinished business of today, and that persistent anxiety that seems to visit precisely when you need rest the most. But what if I told you that one of history's most extraordinary stories could become your pathway to peaceful slumber? Tonight, we're embarking on a journey through the ancient Persian Empire, where palace intrigue, divine providence, and breathtaking courage intertwine to create a narrative so compelling, so perfectly paced, that it will gently guide your restless thoughts toward tranquility. This isn't just any bedtime story. This is the account of a young woman whose bravery saved an entire nation, told in a way that will soothe your spirit and quiet your mind. The Book of Esther unfolds like a masterfully woven tapestry, each thread carefully placed to create something beautiful and meaningful. As we walk through its pages together, you'll find yourself transported to a world of golden palaces and royal gardens, where the soft rustle of silk robes and the gentle splash of fountain water create the perfect soundtrack for relaxation. But here's what makes this story truly special for our evening together. Unlike other biblical narratives filled with dramatic battles or thunderous divine interventions, Esther's tale moves with a different rhythm. It breathes with the patience of someone who understands that the most profound changes often happen quietly, behind the scenes, in the spaces between heartbeats. As you settle into your most comfortable position, allow your breathing to slow and deepen. Feel the weight of your body sinking into your bed, and let your eyelids grow heavy as we begin this ancient journey together. The story we're about to explore has comforted countless souls across thousands of years, and tonight it will comfort you too. Picture, if you will, the vast expanse of the Persian Empire in its golden age. This wasn't just any kingdom, but the mightiest realm the world had ever known. From the spice markets of India to the sun-baked shores of Ethiopia, from the cedar forests of Lebanon to the fertile valleys of Mesopotamia, all acknowledged the authority of one man. King Xerxes ruled from his magnificent palace in Susa, a city that seemed carved from dreams and built from starlight. The palace itself defied imagination. Marble columns rose like ancient trees toward painted ceilings that depicted the heavens themselves. Gardens cascaded down terraced hillsides, filled with flowers gathered from every corner of the known world. The air was sweet with the fragrance of jasmine and roses, while peacocks strutted through courtyards where fountains sang their eternal songs. In this world of overwhelming luxury and absolute power, our story begins not with fanfare or dramatic proclamation, but with a celebration that would change everything. King Xerxes, in his desire to display the magnificent wealth of his kingdom, decided to host a feast unlike any the world had ever seen. For 180 days, the palace doors remained open to nobles, governors, and military commanders from across the empire. Can you imagine the spectacle? Dignitaries arrived in caravans that stretched for miles, bringing gifts of gold and precious stones, exotic animals and rare spices that filled the air with intoxicating aromas. The great hall blazed with the light of thousands of oil lamps, their flames reflecting off golden vessels and precious metals until the entire space seemed to glow with its own inner fire. Tables groaned under the weight of delicacies from every province. Wine flowed like rivers from amphoras crafted by master artisans, each cup different from the last, each one a work of art in itself. As the months passed, the celebration took on a life of its own. Merchants spoke of it in distant marketplaces. Travelers carried tales of its splendor to the far corners of the earth. The very air around Susa seemed to shimmer with excitement and anticipation. But even the most magnificent celebration must eventually reach its crescendo and King Xerxes had planned something special for the final week. He threw open the palace gates, not just to the nobility, but to every citizen of Susa, from the wealthiest merchant to the humblest servant. For 7 days, the common people would dine as royalty, experiencing luxury beyond their wildest dreams. The palace gardens were transformed into an outdoor banquet hall of breathtaking beauty. White and blue linen hangings fluttered gently in the evening breeze, attached to silver rings on marble pillars that gleamed in the lamplight. Couches of gold and silver were arranged on mosaic pavements that told stories in precious stones, each tiny piece of porphyry and mother of pearl, carefully placed by master craftsmen. Here, beneath the star-filled sky of ancient Persia, the wine flowed without restriction. The king had commanded that every guest should drink as much or as little as they pleased. There was no protocol to follow, no ceremony to observe. For these 7 magical days, the rigid structure of imperial society relaxed into something approaching paradise. Meanwhile, in another wing of the palace, Queen Vashti hosted her own celebration for the noble women of the empire. She was known throughout the land for her extraordinary beauty, a woman whose presence could silence a room, and whose grace was spoken of in whispers from India to Ethiopia. Like her husband, she understood the art of hospitality, and her feast was no less magnificent than the king's own. The queen's chambers were filled with the soft laughter of noble ladies, the gentle rustle of silk gowns, and the musical sound of golden bracelets chiming together like tiny bells. Servants moved silently between the guests, offering delicacies on silver platters and pouring wine from vessels that caught the lamplight like captured stars. As the 7th day of celebration dawned, the king found himself in particularly high spirits. The wine had flowed freely the night before, and the success of his grand feast had exceeded even his ambitious expectations. Reports from every corner of the empire spoke of his magnificence, and he felt the warm glow of a man whose dreams had become reality. It was in this mood of expansive generosity and wine-enhanced confidence that King Xerxes made a decision that would echo through history. Surrounded by his closest advisors and military commanders, all of them sharing in the king's elevated mood, he decided that his celebration needed one final perfect touch. "Bring Queen Vashti before us," he commanded, his voice carrying clearly across the great hall. "Let her come wearing her royal crown, that all may see her beauty." The request seemed reasonable enough to the wine-warmed king. After all, what was the point of possessing the most beautiful queen in the world if she could not be displayed like the other treasures of his realm? His guests had admired his gold, marveled at his jewels, and praised his architectural wonders. Surely they should also witness the crown jewel of his collection, the incomparable Queen Vashti herself. The king's servants bowed low and hurried away to deliver this command, while the assembled nobles leaned forward with interest. They had heard tales of the queen's legendary beauty, but few had seen her up close. The anticipation in the hall was palpable as hundreds of powerful men waited to lay eyes upon the woman whose loveliness was said to rival that of the goddesses themselves. But in the quiet chambers, where Queen Vashti held court among the noble ladies, the king's command fell like a stone into still water. The messengers delivered their message with the respectful formality required by protocol, never imagining that anything but immediate compliance would follow. The queen listened to the command in thoughtful silence, her beautiful face revealing nothing of the storm that was building in her heart. Around her, the noble ladies grew quiet, sensing that something significant was happening, though they could not yet understand what it might be. What happened next would send shockwaves through the greatest empire on earth and set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately save a nation. But that, dear listener, is where we'll pause for now, letting the gentle rhythm of this ancient story carry you toward the peaceful rest you seek. As your eyelids grow heavier and your breathing deepens, remember that the most profound stories often begin with the smallest acts of courage. Queen Vashti's quiet moment of decision in her palace chambers would reshape the destiny of millions, proving that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with swords, but with the simple power of standing firm in what we believe is right. Let this thought comfort you as you drift towards sleep, knowing that your own quiet acts of courage matter more than you might ever imagine. Queen Vashti stood in the gentle glow of oil lamps, surrounded by the finest women in the Persian Empire, each one adorned in silks and jewels that would have purchased entire cities. The soft murmur of conversation filled the air like a lullaby, punctuated by the delicate chiming of golden ornaments and the whisper of fabric against marble floors. Yet in this moment of perfect tranquility, history held its breath. The Queen's response would ripple through time, like stones cast into a mirror-calm lake. With dignity that matched her legendary beauty, Queen Vashti delivered words that would echo through the ages. "I will not come." Such simple words, spoken so quietly that they barely disturbed the evening air. Yet they carried the weight of revolution. In a world where the king's word was absolute law, where his slightest wish became reality for millions, one woman had said no. The messengers stood frozen, certain they had misheard. Surely the Queen could not be refusing a direct command from the king himself. They waited, expecting her to reconsider, to realize the impossibility of what she had just said. But Vashti's resolve remained as unshakable as the marble pillars that supported the palace itself. When the servants finally returned to the great hall, their faces pale with the burden of impossible news, the celebration came to an abrupt halt. The king listened to their report with growing disbelief, his wine-flushed face gradually draining of colour. Around him, hundreds of nobles watched in fascination as their emperor grappled with something that had never happened before in the history of his reign. The silence stretched like a bowstring drawn too tight. Here was the ruler of the known world, the man whose armies had conquered nations and whose treasury overflowed with the wealth of a dozen kingdoms, and he had been defied by his own wife. The humiliation burned in his chest like molten gold, made all the worse by the hundreds of witnesses who had heard his command and would now witness his rejection. But anger, even royal anger, must eventually find its course like water seeking the sea. King Xerxes turned to his wisest counselors, men who had guided the empire through countless crises with their careful wisdom and deep understanding of law and custom. Surely they would know how to handle this unprecedented situation. The advisors huddled together like scholars debating ancient texts, their voices low and urgent. They understood better than anyone the implications of what had just occurred. If word spread that even the Queen could disobey the king with impunity, what would prevent others from following her example? What would happen to the careful order that held their vast empire together? One counselor, a man named Memucan, who had earned his position through decades of shrewd political insight, stepped forward to address the king. His words were measured and careful, chosen with the precision of a master craftsman selecting jewels for a crown. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed hall. "Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but every nobleman and every citizen throughout the empire. When word of her defiance spreads, and it surely will, women everywhere will begin to despise their husbands. They will say to themselves, 'Even Queen Vashti refused to obey King Xerxes, so why should we obey our husbands?'" The logic was inescapable, and murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled nobles like wind through wheat fields. Each man could imagine returning home to find his own household in rebellion, his own authority questioned because of what had happened in the royal palace that night. Memucan continued, his voice growing stronger as he saw the king's attention focus on his words. "Therefore, if it pleases your Majesty, let a royal decree be written and inscribed in the laws of Persia and Media, which cannot be altered. Let it declare that Queen Vashti is forever banished from your presence, and let her royal position be given to someone more worthy than she. The suggestion hung in the perfumed air like incense rising toward the painted ceiling. Around the hall, nobles nodded their approval, recognizing the wisdom of decisive action. The king himself felt the rightness of the proposal settling over him like a familiar robe. Here was a solution that would restore his dignity while sending a clear message throughout the empire about the consequences of disobedience. "Let it be so," King Xerxes declared, his voice ringing with renewed authority. "Let the decree be written immediately and sent to every province in the empire, translated into every language and written in every script, so that all may understand. Every man shall be ruler in his own household." And so, in the space of a single evening, the course of history shifted like sand dunes reshaped by desert winds. Scribes worked through the night by lamplight, their reed pens scratching across papyrus as they crafted the royal decree. By dawn, swift messengers were already galloping along the empire's magnificent roads, carrying sealed documents that would proclaim to the world that Queen Vashti was no more. The great celebration came to an end with this dramatic flourish, and gradually the palace returned to its normal rhythms. Nobles departed for their distant provinces, carrying with them tales of the feast and its stunning conclusion. The king's servants cleared away the golden vessels and silk hangings, folding the memory of those 7 magical days into the palace's vast collection of stories. But King Xerxes found himself alone in chambers that suddenly felt too large and too quiet. The anger that had burned so brightly during the confrontation slowly cooled to ash, leaving behind something much harder to bear. As days turned into weeks, he began to remember not just Vashti's defiance, but her beauty, her grace, the way her presence had made even the grandest palace feel like home. The empty throne beside his own became a constant reminder of what he had lost in his moment of wounded pride. During state ceremonies, his eyes would drift to that vacant seat, and he would remember the rustle of silk robes and the soft scent of jasmine that had always announced the queen's approach. His advisors, ever watchful for their master's moods, recognized the signs of royal melancholy. A brooding king was dangerous for the stability of the empire, prone to rash decisions and dark thoughts that could affect millions of lives. Something had to be done to restore their sovereign spirits and secure the dynasty's future. It was during one of these quiet, contemplative days that the king's personal servants approached him with a carefully prepared suggestion. They had watched their master's growing loneliness with concern, and they believed they had found the perfect solution to lift his spirits and restore his joy. "Your Majesty," they said, bowing deeply in the manner required by court protocol, "let beautiful young women be sought throughout all the provinces of your empire. Appoint officers in every region to gather the loveliest maidens and bring them to the palace here in Susa. Let them be placed under the care of Hegai, your trusted keeper of the women, and let them receive the finest beauty treatments and preparations. Then, let the young woman who pleases you most become queen in Vashti's place." The proposal stirred something in the king's weary heart that had been dormant since the night of his great feast. Here was a chance not just to replace what he had lost, but to choose anew from all the beauty that his vast empire could offer. The idea appealed to his sense of imperial grandeur, while promising to heal the loneliness that had settled over his spirit like morning mist. "Let it be done," King Xerxes commanded, and for the first time in weeks, genuine enthusiasm colored his voice. Once again, royal messengers rode out from Susa, but this time they carried a different kind of decree. Throughout the empire, from the snow-capped mountains of Media to the sun-soaked shores of Egypt, from the bustling ports of Asia Minor to the ancient cities of Mesopotamia, the king's officers began their search for the most beautiful young women in the known world. The news created waves of excitement and anxiety in equal measure. In every city and village, families with lovely daughters faced an impossible choice. To be selected meant unimaginable luxury and the chance to become empress of the greatest empire on earth. but it also meant leaving home forever, with no guarantee of success and no possibility of return. Some parents hid their daughters, understanding that once the king's officers saw them, there would be no choice in the matter. Others dressed their girls in their finest clothes and presented them hopefully, dreaming of the day when their child might wear the crown of Persia and their family name might be spoken with reverence throughout the civilized world. As you listen to this ancient tale unfold, let your own breathing slow and deepen, matching the patient rhythm of history itself. These events moved with the stately pace of empire, unfolding over months and years rather than moments. There is something deeply soothing about this measured progression, this sense that even the most dramatic changes happen gradually, like seasons shifting from summer to autumn. Feel yourself sinking deeper into comfort as we continue this journey through time, knowing that every thread in this tapestry has been woven with purpose, every character placed precisely where they needed to be for the grand design to unfold. Among the countless young women gathered from across the empire, there lived in the capital city of Susa a man whose heart carried both profound wisdom and deep love. Mordecai was his name, and though he held no grand title or vast estate, he possessed something far more precious. In his modest home lived a young woman who had become the light of his world, the daughter of his heart, if not his blood. Her Hebrew name was Hadassah, though in the Persian tongue she was known as Esther. She had come to Mordecai as a small child, orphaned when death claimed both her parents in the prime of their lives. With gentle hands and patient heart, this man had raised her as his own, teaching her the ways of their people while helping her navigate life in a foreign land where their faith was neither understood nor always welcomed. Esther had grown into womanhood with a beauty that seemed to radiate from within. Her skin was smooth as polished marble, her eyes deep and thoughtful, holding depths that spoke of both intelligence and compassion. But more than her physical loveliness, she possessed a quality that was harder to define, yet impossible to ignore. There was a stillness about her, a sense of inner strength that revealed itself not through bold gestures, but through quiet confidence and genuine kindness toward everyone she encountered. Mordecai had taught her the ancient stories of their people with the same care that a gardener tends precious flowers. She knew the tales of Abraham's faith, of Moses leading their ancestors from bondage, of judges and kings who had trusted in the God of Israel even when surrounded by foreign powers and hostile forces. These stories had shaped her understanding of what it meant to remain faithful when faith itself seemed dangerous. Their life together was simple but rich with contentment. Each morning, Mordecai would make his way to the king's gate, where he served in a minor capacity among the many officials who conducted the daily business of empire. Each evening, he would return home to find Esther, waiting with the evening meal prepared and gentle questions about his day. They were not wealthy by any measure, but they had each other, and that had always seemed sufficient for happiness. When the king's decree went forth, calling for beautiful young women to be brought to the palace, Mordecai felt a chill of foreboding settle over his heart, like frost on morning grass. He had watched Esther grow from child to woman, had seen how men's conversations stopped when she walked through the marketplace, had noticed the way even hardened merchants would soften their voices when she approached their stalls. Her beauty was not something that could remain hidden forever in a city where the king's officers moved with sharp eyes and absolute authority. And indeed, when those officers arrived in their quarter of the city, their search ended the moment they laid eyes upon Esther. There was no discussion, no negotiation, no possibility of refusal. She would come with them to the palace, and that was the end of the matter. The parting between Mordecai and his beloved adopted daughter was swift and painful, like the sudden tearing of fabric that has been woven with love and care over many years. As Esther prepared to leave the only home she had ever truly known, Mordecai drew her aside for final words, that would prove more important than either of them could have imagined. "Listen carefully to what I tell you now," he whispered urgently, his weathered hands resting gently on her shoulders. "Do not reveal that you are Jewish. Keep your people and your family background secret. The palace is a dangerous place for those who are different, and our people have learned through bitter experience that it is often safer to remain unknown among the powerful." Esther nodded, understanding the wisdom of his words, even as her heart broke at the thought of hiding the faith that had given her life meaning and purpose. But she trusted Mordecai's judgment completely, knowing that his years had taught him lessons about survival that her youth had not yet provided. "I will come to the palace gate every day," he promised, his voice thick with emotion he was struggling to contain. "I will learn how you are faring and what is happening to you. You will not be forgotten or abandoned, my dear one. Though we are separated by palace walls, my love and prayers will follow you always." The royal caravan that carried Esther away from her childhood home was magnificent beyond anything she had ever seen. Horses with coats that gleamed like polished bronze pulled carriages decorated with gold leaf and precious stones. Guards in ceremonial armor rode alongside, their weapons gleaming in the afternoon sun. The very air seemed to shimmer with importance and imperial power. Yet for all its splendor, the journey felt like a passage between two different worlds. One moment she was Hadassah, the Jewish orphan girl who helped her cousin manage his modest household and found joy in simple daily routines. The next moment she was Esther, candidate for the throne of the greatest empire on earth, swept up in events so vast and complex that her mind could barely grasp their scope. When the caravan finally arrived at the palace complex, Esther's breath caught in her throat at the sheer magnitude of what lay before her. The buildings seemed to stretch toward the heavens themselves, their marble facades catching and reflecting the light, until the entire structure appeared to glow with its own inner radiance. Gardens cascaded down terraced hillsides in arrangements so perfect they might have been painted by divine artists. The women's quarters, where she would spend the coming months, were unlike anything her imagination could have conjured. Rooms vast enough to house entire families were appointed with furnishings that represented the finest craftsmanship from every corner of the empire. Silk hangings in colours that had no names draped from walls decorated with precious metals and stones. The very air was perfumed with exotic fragrances that spoke of distant lands and unimaginable luxury. Here she met Haggai, the king's eunuch, who served as keeper of the women. He was a man of middle years with kind eyes, and a manner that spoke of both competence and genuine care for those placed under his authority. From their first meeting, something about Esther's quiet dignity impressed him deeply. Unlike some of the other candidates who demanded special treatment or complained about the arrangements, she listened carefully to instructions and treated everyone, from fellow candidates to the lowest servants, with courtesy and respect. "This one is different," Haggai thought to himself as he watched her settle into her new surroundings. There was no artifice about her, no calculation in her kindness. She seemed genuinely interested in learning the customs of the court and adapting to her new circumstances without losing the essential quality that made her who she was. The preparation process that lay ahead would transform every aspect of her existence. For 12 full months, she and the other candidates would undergo treatments designed to enhance their natural beauty and prepare them for their single audience with the king. It was a year-long transformation that would polish away every rough edge and perfect every gift that nature had bestowed. The first 6 months were devoted to treatments with oil of myrrh, a precious substance so costly that a single amphora was worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. Each morning, Esther would bathe in waters perfumed with this exotic oil, while skilled attendants massaged her hands and feet with preparations that softened the skin and gave it a subtle, intoxicating fragrance. The routine was luxurious, beyond anything she had ever experienced. Yet as the weeks passed, she began to understand that this was not mere indulgence, but careful preparation. Every detail, was designed to create the perfect candidate for queenship, someone who could stand beside the king and represent the empire's beauty and grace to the world. During these long, quiet hours of preparation, Esther observed everything around her with the careful attention that Mordecai had taught her to bring to all new situations. She watched how the palace servants moved and spoke, learning the subtle language of court etiquette that governed every interaction. She studied the other candidates, noting which ones seemed most likely to catch the king's attention and which ones were already beginning to despair of their chances. Most importantly, she listened to the constant flow of information that moved through the women's quarters, like water through channels. Servants gossiped about the king's preferences. Other candidates shared rumors about what he valued in a woman, and gradually a picture emerged of the man who would ultimately choose his new queen. From these whispered conversations, Esther learned that King Xerxes was not simply looking for physical beauty, though that was certainly important. He valued intelligence and the ability to hold interesting conversation. He preferred women who showed proper respect for his position while maintaining their own dignity and personality. Most intriguingly, he seemed genuinely curious about the different parts of his empire and the people who lived in them. As the months of preparation continued, Esther found herself growing stronger rather than weaker under the pressure of palace life. The discipline required for the daily treatments, the need to navigate complex social situations, and the constant awareness that her entire future hung in the balance all served to refine her character rather than diminish it. The second phase of preparation brought treatments with perfumes and cosmetics, oils and spices gathered from every corner of the known world. Master craftsmen taught her the subtle arts of enhancing her natural beauty without hiding it, of moving with the flowing grace expected of royalty, of speaking in the cultured tones that marked someone worthy of the highest circles of power. Yet, through all of this transformation, Esther never forgot Mordecai's crucial instruction to keep her identity secret. When other candidates spoke of their families and backgrounds, she would listen politely, but reveal little about her own origins. When discussions turned to religious practices and beliefs, she would nod thoughtfully, but avoid sharing the faith that remained the cornerstone of her private world. This careful balance between adaptation and preservation required constant vigilance, like walking along the edge of a cliff where one false step could mean disaster. Yet somehow, perhaps guided by wisdom beyond her years, Esther managed to maintain her secret while still forming genuine friendships with some of the other women and earning the respect of the palace staff. And each day, true to his promise, Mordecai would come to the court of the women's quarters, hoping for glimpses of his beloved daughter and news of her welfare. Though they could not speak directly, sometimes servants would carry brief messages between them, small reassurances that served as lifelines connecting her to the life she had known before the palace walls enclosed her world. As you listen to this gentle unfolding of ancient events, let your own breathing match the patient rhythm of these preparations. There is something deeply soothing about this measured progression, this sense that important changes happen gradually, like flowers opening to the morning sun. Feel yourself settling deeper into comfort, knowing that every detail of this story has been preserved through thousands of years because of its enduring power to touch human hearts. The palace slept around them, its marble corridors cool in the night air, while Esther and countless others prepared for a destiny none of them could fully comprehend. In the quiet hours before dawn, when even the grandest empire rested, the most important transformations were taking place in human hearts, preparing them for moments that would reshape the course of history itself. The year of preparation moved like seasons changing, each day bringing Esther closer to a moment that would define not only her own fate, but the destiny of an entire people scattered across the Persian Empire. In the quiet hours of her transformation, as skilled hands worked oils into her skin, and gentle voices taught her the intricate dances of court protocol, divine providence was weaving threads that no human eye could yet perceive. When her time finally arrived, Esther made a choice that would echo through the ages. Unlike the other candidates who adorned themselves with the most elaborate jewelry and costly perfumes they could obtain, she asked only for what Haggai himself recommended. Her trust in his wisdom proved profound, for he had observed the king's preferences through countless audiences and understood what would truly capture royal attention. The evening of her presentation, Esther stood before polished bronze mirrors that reflected back an image of breathtaking beauty, enhanced by remarkable restraint. Her gown was exquisite, yet understated, allowing her natural grace to shine without distraction. The jewelry she wore was carefully chosen to complement rather than overwhelm, each piece selected to create harmony rather than display wealth. As servants led her through corridors she had never seen before, past guards who nodded respectfully but said nothing, Esther felt the weight of destiny settling around her shoulders like a royal cloak. Every step carried her further from the simple life she had known, and closer to a future that remained shrouded in mystery. The great doors opened before her, and she entered the king's private chambers with quiet dignity that commanded attention without demanding it. King Xerxes, who had seen dozens of beautiful women over the preceding months, looked up from his scrolls and felt something shift in the very air around him. Here was beauty, certainly, but something more profound as well. And quality of presence that was difficult to define, but impossible to ignore. As they spoke through the evening hours, the king found himself drawn not just to Esther's physical loveliness, but to her intelligence, her genuine curiosity about the world beyond her experience, and her ability to listen with complete attention when he shared the burdens and joys of ruling such a vast realm. When dawn approached and protocol required her to withdraw, King Xerxes knew that his search had ended. The other candidates who came after Esther seemed somehow diminished by comparison, like stars trying to shine in the presence of the sun. His heart had found what it had been seeking, though he could not have articulated exactly what that was. The coronation was planned, with all the ceremony befitting the elevation of a new queen. Throughout the empire, preparations began for celebrations that would mark this momentous occasion. The palace buzzed with activity as servants prepared for guests who would travel from the far corners of the known world to witness the crowning of their new empress. On the day of her coronation, Esther stood once again before the assembled court, but now as their chosen queen. The crown that was placed upon her head was heavy with more than precious stones and gold. It carried the weight of responsibility for an empire, the hopes of a king who had found love as well as beauty, and the secret burden of her hidden identity. The celebration that followed lasted for days, with festivities extending throughout all the provinces. King Xerxes declared a holiday in honor of his new queen, distributing gifts and reducing taxes as expressions of his joy. The name of Queen Esther was proclaimed from India to Ethiopia, carried by swift messengers who rode the great roads that connected the empire's distant corners. But even in the midst of such triumph, Esther remembered Mordecai's counsel. She revealed nothing of her background or her people, maintaining the careful silence that protected not only herself, but potentially countless others. Each day, she grew more skilled at navigating the complex currents of palace life, while keeping her deepest secrets safely guarded. The king, for his part, found in Esther not just a beautiful wife, but a trusted companion whose wisdom proved valuable in matters both personal and political. Their marriage flourished as genuine affection grew between them, built on mutual respect and shared commitment to the welfare of their vast realm. Meanwhile, Mordecai continued his quiet service at the king's gate, watching over his beloved adopted daughter from a distance, while conducting the modest business that supported his simple life. The palace walls might separate them physically, but the bond between them remained as strong as ever, sustained by occasional glimpses and carefully passed messages. It was during one of these ordinary days that Mordecai overheard something that made his blood run cold. Two of the king's personal guards, Men named Bigthan and Teresh, who had access to the royal chambers, were speaking in hushed, angry tones near the guardhouse. Their words, carried on the morning breeze, revealed a plot so shocking that Mordecai could scarcely believe what he was hearing. These men, trusted with the king's very life, were planning to assassinate their sovereign. Their grievances against King Xerxes had festered into murderous intent, and they had chosen a time and method for carrying out their treasonous plan. The details Mordecai overheard were specific enough to leave no doubt about their deadly seriousness. The weight of this knowledge pressed down upon Mordecai like a physical burden. Here was information that could save the king's life, but how could a minor official gain audience with the emperor to deliver such a warning? Direct access to the throne was impossible for someone of his humble station, and any accusation against the royal bodyguards would require proof that he did not possess. But Providence had already provided a solution, though Mordecai had not yet recognized it. Queen Esther's position gave her the access he lacked, and their family connection, though secret, provided a channel for communication that could bypass the normal barriers of palace protocol. Through carefully chosen intermediaries, Mordecai sent word to his adopted daughter about what he had discovered. The message was urgent but necessarily brief, containing just enough detail to convey the reality of the threat without risking interception by hostile ears. Esther received this intelligence with the quick understanding that had always characterized her mind, and she acted with the decisive courage that would mark all her great moments. Without delay, she sought audience with her husband and delivered the warning that would save his life. King Xerxes, shocked by the revelation of treachery so close to his person, immediately ordered a thorough investigation. When the conspirators were questioned separately, their stories contradicted each other in ways that revealed their guilt beyond any doubt. Justice was swift and final. Bigthan and Teresh were executed for their treason, their bodies displayed as a warning to any others who might consider betraying their king. The threat to the royal life had been eliminated through the vigilance of one man and the courage of a queen who knew how to act when action was required. King Xerxes was deeply moved by this demonstration of loyalty from an unexpected source. He ordered the entire incident to be recorded in the official chronicles of his reign, ensuring that Mordecai's faithful service would be preserved for future generations. Every detail was carefully documented in the precise language of royal records, creating a permanent account that would rest in the palace archives. Yet somehow, in the relief of having escaped death and the busy flow of imperial business that followed, no immediate reward was given to the man who had saved the king's life. The incident was duly recorded. Gratitude was expressed, but the actual bestowal of honors was delayed by the countless demands that pressed upon the royal attention each day. Mordecai returned to his modest position at the gate, content in the knowledge that he had done his duty and that Esther remained safe in her elevated position. Neither he nor the king could have imagined how crucial this recorded debt would become in the events that lay ahead, or how the chronicles that now contained his name would soon play a role far greater than anyone could have anticipated. Sometimes the most significant seeds are planted in the most ordinary soil, taking root in ways that only become visible when the proper season arrives for their flowering. The saved king, the recorded deed, and the unrewarded loyalty would all prove essential elements in a tapestry being woven by hands far wiser than any human planner could possess. As months passed, and the palace settled into new rhythms around Queen Esther's presence, changes began to stir in the broader currents of imperial politics. King Xerxes, seeking to reward faithful service and strengthen his administration, decided to elevate one of his officials to a position of unprecedented authority. The man he chose was named Haman, descended from an ancient line that traced its heritage back through generations of ambitious and ruthless leaders. His family history carried within it seeds of hatred that had been carefully preserved and passed down like precious heirlooms, waiting for the right moment to sprout into something terrible and destructive. King Xerxes saw in Haman qualities that seemed useful for managing a vast empire. Here was a man with a sharp mind for administration, an even sharper instinct for political maneuvering, and an absolute dedication to advancing what he claimed were Persian interests. His cunning intelligence and apparent loyalty made him appear to be exactly what the king needed as his chief minister. The promotion was announced with great ceremony in the royal court. Haman was given robes of honor, a signet ring that carried almost as much authority as the king's own, and a seat of power that placed him above all other officials throughout the empire. From that day forward, every noble, every governor, every servant would bow when Haman passed, acknowledging his elevation to the highest ranks of imperial power. The physical transformation in Haman was immediate and striking. Already a tall man with commanding presence, he now carried himself with the swagger of someone who knew that his word could determine the fate of provinces. His clothing became more elaborate, his manner more imperious, his expectations of deference more demanding with each passing day. But power also revealed darker aspects of Haman's character that had been carefully hidden during his rise through the governmental ranks. He was not content simply to exercise authority over others. He needed to see that authority acknowledged and celebrated by everyone around him, to know that his elevation had made others feel small and insignificant in comparison. The king's decree that all officials should bow before Haman was not enough to satisfy his growing ego. He wanted to see fear in people's eyes when they lowered themselves before him, to witness firsthand the complete submission of those who had once considered themselves his equals or superiors. His rise to power created ripples throughout the palace and beyond, as officials who had previously held positions of influence suddenly found themselves marginalized and forced to curry favor with a man they had once treated as merely another ambitious colleague seeking advancement. Throughout all of these changes, Mordecai continued his daily routine at the king's gate, observing the shifting patterns of power with the careful attention of someone who had learned to read the subtle signs that preceded major changes in imperial policy. He watched Haman's growing influence with concern, sensing something troubling in the man's character that went beyond simple political ambition. When the decree came that all should bow before the new chief minister, Mordecai faced a choice that would test everything he believed about faith, duty, and the courage required to stand firm in one's convictions when the cost of such steadfastness could prove devastating. Each morning, as officials and servants made their way through the king's gate to begin another day of imperial business, they would pause when Haman appeared, lowering their heads and bending their knees in the prescribed manner of respect. The elaborate dance of submission played out dozens of times each day, a constant reminder of hierarchy and power that kept the machinery of government functioning smoothly. But among all those who bowed, one figure remained standing. Day after day, Mordecai held his ground with quiet dignity, showing appropriate respect for Haman's position, while refusing to compromise the deeper convictions that governed his relationship with the divine. The distinction he was making was subtle, but crucial in his understanding. Bowing to Haman in the manner demanded was not merely showing political respect, but offering a form of worship that belonged only to the Creator of all things. As a faithful follower of the God of Israel, he could acknowledge Haman's governmental authority without crossing the line into spiritual compromise. At first, Haman was too busy with his new responsibilities to notice one man's quiet defiance among so many displays of submission. But as days turned into weeks, other officials began to whisper about the Jewish man who refused to follow the king's command regarding proper respect for the chief minister. When the matter was finally brought to Haman's attention, his reaction was immediate and intense. No one had dared to defy him since his elevation to power, and the idea that a minor official would publicly refuse to acknowledge his authority struck him like a physical blow. His face flushed with anger, his hands clenched into fists, and those around him could see rage building like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. But when Haman learned that Mordecai was Jewish, something far more dangerous than simple wounded pride began to stir in his heart. The ancient hatred that had been passed down through his family line awakened like a sleeping predator catching the scent of prey. This was no longer about one man's disobedience, but about the opportunity to settle scores that reached back through generations of bitter memory. As you drift deeper toward peaceful rest, let these ancient currents of conflict and courage wash over you like gentle waves. In the darkness of your bedroom, far removed from palace intrigue and imperial politics, remember that the same forces that shaped Esther's world continue to move through human hearts today. The choice between standing firm in truth or bending to pressure remains as relevant now as it was in the halls of ancient Persia. Feel your breathing slow and deepen as this timeless story continues to unfold, carrying you toward the rest your weary spirit seeks. The threads of providence are still being woven, and the most dramatic moments of this ancient tale are yet to come, waiting to accompany you into dreams where courage conquers fear and divine purpose reveals itself through the most unlikely of heroes. In the quiet spaces between wakefulness and sleep, let yourself be comforted by the knowledge that even in the darkest hours, when evil seems to have gained the upper hand, there are always those who refuse to bow to anything less than truth itself. The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as Haman's fury crystallized into something far more sinister than wounded pride. In the privacy of his chambers, surrounded by maps that showed the vast reach of Persian authority, he began to conceive a plan so monstrous that it would have shocked even his ancestors who had passed down their legacy of hatred through generations. Why should he content himself with punishing one defiant Jew when he could solve what he saw as a much larger problem? Throughout the empire, Jewish communities maintained their own customs, worshipped their own god, and considered themselves a people apart despite living under Persian rule. To Haman's twisted thinking, this represented a fundamental threat to imperial unity and his own authority. The plan that took shape in his mind was breathtaking in its scope and chilling in its simplicity. He would approach the king with carefully crafted words, painting the Jewish people as a source of disloyalty and discord throughout the realm. Then he would request permission to eliminate this perceived threat once and for all, offering to pay for the privilege from his own treasury. But timing would be crucial for such an audacious request. Haman consulted with astrologers and cast lots to determine the most auspicious moment for presenting his proposal to the king. The lots fell on a date nearly a year in the future, the 13th day of the 12th month called Adar. This delay would serve his purposes perfectly, allowing time for careful preparation while building anticipation for what he presented as a necessary cleansing of the empire. When Haman finally sought audience with King Xerxes, he came prepared with arguments designed to appeal to the monarch's concerns about governing such a diverse realm. His words were smooth as silk and poisonous as venom, carefully crafted to obscure his personal motivations behind a facade of imperial necessity. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice carrying the respectful tone that had always served him well in royal chambers. "There is a certain people scattered and dispersed among all the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's laws. Therefore, it is not in your Majesty's interest to tolerate them." The accusation hung in the perfumed air, like incense rising toward the painted ceiling. Haman paused, allowing his words to take root in the king's mind before continuing with his most persuasive argument. "If it pleases the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who have charge of the king's business, to bring it into the king's treasuries." The sum was staggering, representing wealth beyond what most kingdoms could accumulate in a lifetime. To King Xerxes, occupied with the countless demands of governing his vast empire, the proposal seemed to offer a simple solution to what Haman presented as a complex administrative problem, while also enriching the royal treasury substantially. Without investigating further or asking detailed questions about which people Haman meant, The king removed his signet ring and handed it to his chief minister. This simple gesture transferred absolute authority to craft whatever decree Haman deemed necessary, sealed with the royal seal that made any document unbreakable law throughout the Persian realm. "The money is yours," King Xerxes said with a casual wave of his hand, "and the people as well, to do with them as it seems good to you." Those words, spoken so carelessly in a moment of distracted attention, sealed the fate of millions of innocent people scattered across the empire. Haman's eyes gleamed with triumph as he accepted the ring, knowing that he now possessed the power to transform his personal hatred into imperial policy. The scribes were summoned immediately, and throughout that night, they worked by lamplight to craft the most terrible document in the empire's history. Written in the script of every province and translated into every language spoken throughout the Persian realm, the decree ordered the complete annihilation of all Jewish people on a single day still months in the future. The language was precise and merciless, leaving no room for mercy or exception. Every Jewish person, from the youngest child to the oldest elder, was to be killed on the appointed day. Their property would be seized by whoever carried out the executions, providing economic incentive for enthusiastic enforcement of the royal command. Swift messengers carried sealed copies of this death warrant to every corner of the empire, their horses' hooves thundering along the great roads that connected distant provinces to the capital. In cities and villages from India to Ethiopia, the same shocking news would soon be proclaimed in marketplaces and posted on government buildings. As the couriers departed Susa with their terrible cargo, Haman and the king sat down to drink wine together, as if they had accomplished nothing more significant than routine administrative business. The casual nature of their celebration made the enormity of what they had authorized even more chilling. But while the palace remained calm, the city of Susa itself began to buzz with confusion and distress as word of the decree spread through the streets. Citizens who had Jewish neighbors, friends, and business partners struggled to understand why these seemingly harmless people had suddenly been marked for destruction. When Mordecai learned of the decree that bore his people's death sentence, his world collapsed around him like a building shaken by earthquake. The man who had maintained his dignity through every challenge now tore his clothes in the ancient gesture of mourning, covering himself with sackcloth and ashes as grief overwhelmed his spirit. Through the streets of Susa he walked, his voice raised in anguish that echoed off marble buildings and golden statues. The sight of this normally composed official, reduced to such visible despair, caught the attention of passers-by, who stopped to stare in wonder at what tragedy could have broken such a steadfast man. Across the empire, similar scenes played out as Jewish communities received the news that their days were numbered. In every province touched by the decree, families gathered in synagogues and private homes to fast and pray, their voices rising to heaven like smoke from countless altars as they sought divine intervention in their darkest hour. The sound of lamentation became so widespread that even those who remained safely outside its reach could not ignore the depth of anguish that the royal decree had unleashed. Some non-Jewish citizens felt genuine sympathy for their condemned neighbors, while others began to eye Jewish property with the calculating gaze of those who saw opportunity in others' tragedy. In the palace, Queen Esther remained initially unaware of the storm that was gathering around her people. The royal chambers were designed to insulate their occupants from the harsher realities of life beyond the marble walls, and the routine of court ceremonies continued much as it always had. But news of Mordecai's public mourning eventually reached her through the network of servants who moved between the palace and the city beyond. When Esther's attendants reported that her kinsman was sitting at the king's gate dressed in sackcloth and ashes, she felt alarm grip her heart like icy fingers. Her first instinct was to send proper clothing to replace his mourning garments, hoping that if he could dress appropriately, he might gain entry to the palace and explain this mysterious behavior. But when the clothes were returned untouched, she realized that something far more serious than personal grief was driving his public display of anguish. Through trusted intermediaries, Esther began to piece together the truth that would shatter her carefully protected world. The decree, the date, the comprehensive nature of the threat. All of it emerged through whispered conversations and carefully passed messages until the full horror of the situation became clear. Her people, scattered throughout the empire and living quietly as productive citizens, had been condemned to death by a law bearing her own husband's seal. The man she loved, who shared her bed and sought her counsel on matters of state, had unknowingly authorized the destruction of every person who shared her blood and faith. The irony was devastating and complete. Queen Esther, elevated to the highest position a woman could achieve in the Persian Empire, discovered that her royal crown offered no protection against the death sentence that now hung over her head, like a sword suspended by the thinnest of threads. As these revelations settled into her consciousness like stones sinking into deep water, Esther faced a choice that would define not only her own fate, but the destiny of an entire people. She could remain silent, hoping that her hidden identity would protect her while her kinsmen faced destruction. Or she could risk everything she had gained to stand with those who shared her heritage, knowing that such a choice might cost her life. The weight of this decision pressed down upon her as she lay sleepless through the long nights that followed, staring at silk hangings that suddenly seemed like the walls of a beautiful prison. Outside her windows, the city of Susa continued its daily rhythms, unaware that within the royal chambers, a young woman wrestled with the kind of choice that echoes through eternity. Let the gentle rhythm of this ancient story carry you now toward the peaceful rest your spirit seeks. As your breathing deepens and your body settles into the comfort of your bed, remember that even in the darkest hours, when evil seems to have gained the upper hand, there are always those who choose courage over safety, truth over comfort, and love over fear. The threads of this timeless tale continue to weave together, guided by a wisdom that sees the end from the beginning and works through human hearts to accomplish purposes greater than any individual can comprehend. Rest now in the knowledge that morning always follows even the darkest night, and that the same divine providence that guided Esther through her trials continues to watch over all who trust in goodness greater than themselves. Sleep well, dear listener, knowing that your own story too is being written by hands that understand the perfect timing for every season of trial and triumph, sorrow and joy, fear and faith that makes up the beautiful complexity of human existence.